Emma Reynolds had always been the quiet girl in class, the one who kept her head down, avoiding the spotlight. She wasn't a popular kid, nor was she an outcast. She was simply, there. A small-town girl with big dreams, always trying to blend in while secretly wishing for something more. But that morning, everything was about to change. It started as an innocent conversation, something that could have easily been ignored. Mrs. Thompson, the science teacher, was lecturing about the upcoming space project, an assignment that had the entire class buzzing with excitement. Emma sat at the back, scribbling notes into her notebook, her mind wandering. Space had always fascinated her, ever since she was a little girl. She loved reading about NASA, space missions, and the mysteries of the universe. Her dad worked at NASA, after all, though it was a secret he kept hidden from most people. She had never really shared that with anyone at school. Until today. "All right, class," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice bright and eager, "this year's science project will focus on the future of space exploration. We're going to be covering everything from new technology to upcoming missions to Mars. I want you all to think big, don't hold back." A few students cheered and muttered to each other about their plans. Emma's heart raced. The topic was personal to her, too personal, but she felt a strange urge to say something. Something to get people's attention. Something to prove that she wasn't just another student who faded into the background. Her fingers gripped the edge of her desk as she hesitated, her mind working quickly. Then, without thinking, she blurted it out. "My dad works at NASA." The words hung in the air, lingering like a strange echo. Emma immediately regretted it, her face flushing bright red as the entire class turned to look at her. It was as though time had stopped for a moment. Mrs. Thompson raised an eyebrow, and the other students exchanged puzzled glances. "Really?" Mark Evans, the class clown, scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your dad works at NASA." "Sure, Emma, and my uncle's an astronaut." The class erupted into laughter. Emma's heart sank. She had never intended to draw this kind of attention to herself, especially not in the middle of a project that was already making her nervous. The laughter grew louder, and she shrank in her seat, wishing the floor would swallow her up. "Yeah, right." Rachel Green, one of the popular girls, added, her voice laced with mockery. "NASA. What's next? You gonna tell us you're gonna be an astronaut too?" The teasing continued, and Emma felt the sting of their words. It wasn't just that they didn't believe her, it was the way they mocked her, the way they dismissed something that meant so much to her. Her dad wasn't famous. He wasn't some big-name astronaut or scientist. But he was smart, hard-working, and devoted to his work at NASA. And to her, that was enough. He had always been the quiet, unassuming man who worked behind the scenes, never asking for attention or recognition. Emma knew the truth, but it felt like no one else did. And she hated that. Just as she was about to sink into the ground in embarrassment, Mrs. Thompson cleared her throat, her eyes narrowing at the class. "All right, that's enough," she said firmly. "Let's remember we're all here to learn, not to tear each other down. Emma, if you're saying your dad works at NASA, I believe you. Don't worry about them." Emma nodded, her throat tight. She wished she could say more, defend herself, explain who her dad really was. But the words wouldn't come. She simply sat there, her mind racing, her stomach twisted in knots. As the class settled down, Emma's gaze shifted to the window. She stared out at the overcast sky, trying to focus on the calm, distant horizon, but the laughter still echoed in her ears. Her thoughts swirled, a mix of frustration and disbelief. Was she wrong to tell them? Was it really that unbelievable? She knew they were just kids, but why did it have to feel so humiliating? Her best friend, Sophie, glanced at her sympathetically from the next row. Sophie had been Emma's rock for years, the one person who truly understood her. Sophie leaned forward, her whisper barely audible. "Don't listen to them. You know the truth. We all know the truth. Emma managed a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sophie was right, but it didn't stop the ache in her chest. What was the point of telling the truth when no one would believe her? The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, and the class began to shuffle out of the room. Emma lingered behind, gathering her books slowly, unsure of what to do next. Her classmates filed out, still whispering and laughing, and the laughter seemed to follow her into the hallways. She could feel their eyes on her, and it felt like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at her skin. "Hey, Emma," Sophie called, catching up with her as she walked toward the exit. "Are you okay?" Emma nodded, but it was a lie. She wasn't okay. Not yet. "I just don't get it," Emma muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why does everyone think it's so hard to believe? My dad really does work there. It's not a big deal." "I know," Sophie said softly. "But to them, it is. They have no idea what it's like to have someone close to NASA. They don't get it." Emma was quiet for a moment as they walked together toward the lunchroom. It was true. No one would understand what her dad did, the long hours he spent working on missions, the quiet dedication he put into everything he did. He didn't wear a NASA jumpsuit or fly a rocket to space. He was the one behind the scenes, making sure everything worked. He didn't need recognition. But Emma couldn't help feeling that she needed to prove something, not to her classmates, but to herself. If they couldn't believe her now, she would find a way to make them believe. Sophie broke the silence. "You'll show them, Em. Just wait. You've got this." Emma smiled at her friend, feeling a tiny bit of reassurance. Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe this wasn't the end, but the beginning. The beginning of something bigger. As they entered the lunchroom, Emma made a silent promise to herself. She was going to prove it. She was going to show her classmates that her dad wasn't just some random man who worked in some random place. NASA was real, and so was the man who worked there. The laughter might have stung, but it also ignited something inside of her. A fire. A determination. And she was going to carry it with her for as long as it took. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emma Reynolds had always known that her life was a little different from the others in her high school. She wasn't rich, popular, or part of any social group that seemed to rule the halls. Instead, she was the quiet girl who often stayed in the background, observing more than participating. But it wasn't because she lacked confidence, it was because she didn't want to stand out. Standing out brought attention, and attention always felt like it came with expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. Emma grew up in a small town where the hustle and bustle of city life was far away, and the stars seemed a little brighter. Her dad, Jacob Reynolds, was an engineer at NASA, working on projects most people would never even understand. He never talked about it much, though. He wasn't the kind of man who sought recognition. To most people, Jacob was just a quiet, reserved figure. A good man, a loving father, but a man whose career seemed like a mystery to his family and everyone around him. Emma remembered the first time she'd asked her dad about his job. She was only 8 years old, sitting on the porch of their small house, the sun setting behind the trees. She had always been fascinated by space, even as a little girl. She loved looking up at the night sky, wondering what it would be like to float among the stars. Her dad, in her eyes, was a quiet hero, but she didn't know much about the work he did at NASA. "Dad, what do you do at NASA?" she had asked, her face full of curiosity. Jacob had smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he ruffled her hair. "I work with rockets and technology, honey. I help make sure they don't explode when they go up." Emma had laughed at that, imagining her dad standing next to a rocket, his arms crossed, ensuring everything worked perfectly. But as she got older, she started to realize that what he did was much more important than that simple explanation. Still, he refused to talk about it in any detail, always brushing off her questions with a quiet smile or a change of subject. Emma accepted it, never pushing him further. Her mom, on the other hand, was a completely different story. Claire Reynolds was a constant source of support and encouragement. She was a teacher at the local middle school, and Emma had always admired her for her patience and dedication. Claire never hesitated to show Emma how proud she was, whether it was about her grades or simply the person Emma was becoming. She was the one who pushed Emma to follow her passions and explore the world beyond their small town, even when Emma wasn't sure if she could. "Your dad may not say much about his work, Em, but that doesn't mean it's not important," her mom had told her once, sitting beside her on the couch, a cup of tea in her hands. "He does incredible things that change the world. Just like you can." Emma had always taken her mom's words to heart, even if she sometimes doubted them. It wasn't easy being the quiet girl who preferred the comfort of books over the chaos of social life. But her mom's faith in her was unwavering, and that kept Emma going through the rough patches of middle and high school. Still, it wasn't just her parents that shaped Emma's journey. There were also the friendships she had, or, more accurately, the lack of them. She had a few close friends over the years, but most of the time, she kept to herself, not because she didn't want to connect with others, but because it was easier not to try. Sophie Parker was one of the few people who had stuck around since elementary school. Sophie was outgoing, always full of energy and ideas, and she had a way of drawing people in without even trying. She was the kind of person everyone liked to be around, and Emma admired her for that. But their friendship wasn't always easy. Sophie, with her natural charm and bubbly personality, was the center of attention in nearly every room she walked into. Emma, on the other hand, was happy to fade into the background. It wasn't that she didn't want to stand out, it was that standing out felt risky. It felt like she was exposing herself to judgment, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. Yet, Sophie had always accepted her, never pushing her to be someone she wasn't. They balanced each other out, even if Emma sometimes felt like she was living in Sophie's shadow. And then there was the part of her that was always alone, the part of Emma that felt like she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her dad's work at NASA was something no one understood. People didn't get why she never talked about it, why she never flaunted her connection to one of the most prestigious space agencies in the world. Maybe it was because she didn't want to appear like she was boasting, or maybe it was because she didn't know how to explain the quiet pride she felt in her dad's accomplishments. But it wasn't just about NASA. Emma had always felt different in other ways too. She was good at math, maybe even better than her classmates, but she never drew attention to it. When the science fairs came around, she would build a project, something small and modest, and it would always be enough to get a good grade, but never the first place ribbon. She never sought perfection, she sought balance. She wanted to do her best, but she didn't want to stand out too much. Still, there was always this nagging feeling deep inside her that she was capable of more. She had spent years trying to blend in, trying to keep things simple, but something had changed recently. The space project that Mrs. Thompson had announced, the teasing about her dad working at NASA, it was like the universe was telling her it was time to step up. Time to stop hiding. As Emma walked out of her second period class, the hallway filled with the usual chatter and noise, but Emma was lost in thought. For the first time, she didn't want to fade into the background anymore. She didn't want to be the girl whose dad worked at NASA but never shared anything about it. She wanted to stand tall, to take ownership of her story, and to finally show everyone what she was capable of. It wouldn't be easy, and she knew that. But if she wanted to be seen, she had to start seeing herself first. "Hey, Em," Sophie said, catching up with her again. "Don't let them get to you. You're so much more than what they think." Emma smiled, feeling a small spark of hope ignite within her. Maybe this was her time. Maybe it was finally time to share the truth, not just about her dad, but about who she was and what she could do. With a deep breath, Emma squared her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. It was only a few days after Emma's announcement in class that things started to take a turn. The teasing didn't stop, if anything, it only got worse. The whispers in the hallways, the snickers at lunch, the mocking glances, all of it wore on her. But what stung the most was the growing feeling that people didn't take her seriously. It wasn't just the kids at school who didn't believe her, it felt like they didn't even care to listen. Emma tried her best to ignore it, to keep her head down and focus on the work in front of her. After all, she was determined to prove them wrong. If they didn't believe her now, she would show them. She'd work harder on the space project, making it so impressive that they couldn't ignore it. But as the days went on, she realized that her classmates' doubts weren't her only problem. Her relationship with her parents began to feel strained too. It was a Tuesday night when the tension first bubbled over. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table, working on her space project. Her dad had just come home from work, and the sound of the front door opening signaled the end of his long day. Jacob Reynolds was the kind of man who walked into a room without saying much, but you could feel his presence. His quiet strength, the kind that came from years of dedication and hard work, was unmistakable. But tonight, something was different. His face was drawn, his shoulders tense. "Hey, Em," he said, his voice low and tired. "How was school today?" Emma barely looked up from her papers. "It was fine," she muttered, her tone flat. She didn't feel like talking about the teasing, the jokes, the hurt that had been building all week. Jacob paused, looking at her with concern. "You sure? You've been awfully quiet lately." "I'm fine," Emma repeated, though she wasn't sure herself. "I've just been focused on the project." Her dad took a seat at the counter, running a hand through his hair. "You've been working pretty hard on that space project, huh?" Emma nodded, her mind racing. She wanted to ask him about NASA, about his job, to learn more about what he did and maybe even use that knowledge to impress her classmates. But she was afraid. Afraid of what he might say, afraid that he would shut her down again. So instead, she said nothing. Jacob's eyes softened as he watched her. "You know, honey, I'm proud of you for going after something that interests you. It's an amazing thing to get into." Emma felt a pang in her chest. "Yeah, well, some people think it's all just a joke," she said quietly, barely above a whisper. Her dad raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I don't know," she said, pushing her papers aside and standing up. "They just don't take me seriously. They think I'm lying about you working at NASA. They keep making fun of me for it." Jacob's face tightened, and for a moment, Emma could see a flicker of something in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or frustration. But he quickly masked it with a sigh. "You know, I never wanted to make a big deal about my job," he said slowly. "I don't want you to feel like you have to be defined by what I do." Emma crossed her arms. "I'm not. But it's hard when people think I'm making things up, especially when it's about something that's a big part of my life." Jacob nodded, his expression unreadable. "I get it. But you don't need anyone's approval to feel good about who you are or what your family does. People are always going to doubt things they don't understand. Don't let it get to you." Emma couldn't help the frustration that bubbled up inside her. "It's easy for you to say. You're the one who works at NASA. Everyone thinks you're this big deal, but to me, it's just, you. It's just my dad. But when I try to talk about it, everyone thinks I'm lying or trying to get attention. It's exhausting." Her dad stood up, walking over to her. "I understand, Emma. But the thing is, you don't need anyone else's validation to know what's real. What we do here, what you're doing, this is your story. Your path. If people don't believe in it, that's their problem. Don't let it define you." Emma was quiet for a moment, her eyes downcast. She wanted to believe him. She really did. But part of her felt as though her dad was just trying to make her feel better, and that only made her feel more alone. Why couldn't he just tell her more about what he did? Why was he so determined to keep everything so private? "I just wish you'd tell me more about your work," Emma said softly, her voice barely audible. It might help me understand better. It might help me prove them wrong. Jacob's eyes flickered with something, regret, perhaps, or sadness, but he quickly turned away, pulling a chair out and sitting down. I can't, Em. It's not that I don't want to, but I can't share everything with you. Some things are classified. Some things are complicated. His voice trailed off, as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. I'm proud of you for wanting to follow in my footsteps, but the truth is, you have your own path to walk. And sometimes, that means walking it alone. Emma swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to understand, but it felt like her dad was holding something back from her. Something important. She stood there for a moment, staring at him, before slowly walking out of the kitchen. She went to her room, closed the door behind her, and sat on her bed. The weight of everything felt heavier now. The teasing at school was bad enough, but the disconnect with her dad felt like an even bigger burden. She wanted to be close to him, to understand his world. She wanted to feel like she was a part of something bigger, something that mattered. But right now, everything felt so distant. The next day, at school, things only got worse. Mark Evans and Rachel Green made another round of mocking comments during lunch. This time, they had a new joke: Emma's dad works at NASA, but only because he's the janitor. Their laughter echoed through the cafeteria, and Emma felt her face heat with embarrassment. But as much as it hurt, she wasn't ready to back down. She wasn't going to let them have the last word. She couldn't. Not after everything her dad had taught her. It wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving herself right. She wasn't going to let anyone define her, not anymore. Emma Reynolds had a story to tell, and this time, she was going to make sure the world listened. The days that followed were a blur. Emma tried to focus on her schoolwork, tried to keep up with her assignments and the constant teasing. But it was getting harder to ignore. The whispers behind her back, the sarcastic remarks in the hallway, every day felt like a struggle to maintain any sense of normalcy. Still, she refused to back down. Something inside her had shifted. Emma wasn't just going to be the girl who faded into the background anymore. The turning point came during a rare moment of vulnerability. It was after the science fair announcement. Mrs. Thompson had handed out the guidelines, and the buzz in the classroom was electric. Everyone was talking about their ideas, eager to show off their latest inventions or research projects. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a spark of excitement. She would use the space project. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she was going to turn it into something that would make everyone stop laughing at her. That night, after dinner, Emma made a decision. She was going to confront the people who had been mocking her. She would show them that her dad's work at NASA wasn't a joke, it was real. But more than that, she was going to take ownership of her story. She wasn't going to let their ignorance define her. Emma was determined to take the space project to new heights, to bring her father's world to life in a way that would be impossible for anyone to ignore. "Mom, can we talk?" Emma asked, her voice low but resolute. Claire Reynolds, who was sitting at the kitchen counter with a book in her hand, looked up and smiled. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "I want to do something big. Something that's going to prove to everyone that I'm not just some girl with a dad at NASA." Emma felt the words tumble out, each one heavy with the frustration she had been carrying around for weeks. "I'm not just going to let them mock me anymore." Claire set the book aside, her expression softening. "I think that's a great idea, Em. You're strong, and you've always had the potential to do amazing things. What do you need from me?" Emma's heart swelled with gratitude. Her mom had always been her rock, always ready to support her no matter what. "I need your help with the project," she said, her voice gaining more confidence. "I'm going to build something that proves I'm serious about this. I want to include stuff from Dad's work. I want to show them what NASA actually does." Claire raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Are you sure about that?" You know your dad doesn't usually like to talk about his work. Emma nodded, determination hardening in her gaze. I know. But I've been thinking a lot about it. I'm not going to just sit back and let them make fun of me. I want to show them that it's real. And if I have to ask Dad for help, I will. Claire hesitated, her fingers lightly tapping the table as she thought it over. Emma, you need to be prepared for the fact that your dad might not share much. His job is complicated. But if you're willing to take that step, I'll support you however I can. Emma felt a weight lift off her shoulders. This was it. She was finally going to take control of her story. The next morning, Emma took a deep breath as she walked into her first period. The atmosphere was still charged with the same energy that had accompanied the teasing over the past few days. But this time, she wasn't going to let it get to her. Her mind was focused on the project, on showing them all that she was more than the jokes they had made. As she took her seat, Sophie slid into the desk next to her. You okay? Sophie asked, her voice full of concern. You've been kind of distant lately. Emma smiled faintly. Yeah, I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. I've got a plan. Sophie raised an eyebrow. A plan for what? Emma looked over at her friend, feeling the excitement rise in her chest. A plan to show everyone what I'm really capable of. I'm going to nail this project. I'm not letting them mock me anymore. Sophie's expression softened, and she placed a hand on Emma's arm. I know you can do it, Em. You've got this. Just don't let them get to you. Emma nodded. It was strange, hearing Sophie say those words. For so long, Emma had been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background. But now, everything felt different. She wasn't going to be quiet anymore. She was going to stand up, not just for herself, but for her dad's legacy and the work he did every day to make the impossible possible. Later that evening, as the house quieted down, Emma sat down at the dinner table with her dad. Her heart raced as she tried to figure out how to bring up the subject she had been dreading. She could feel the distance between them, the unspoken tension that had existed ever since she was little. It wasn't just about the job at NASA, it was about the unspoken wall that had always been there. Dad, she began, her voice steady despite the nerves coursing through her, I'm working on a big project for the science fair. It's about space, and I want to include some of the stuff you do at NASA. I was hoping you could help me. Jacob paused mid-bite, his fork hovering above his plate. For a moment, he didn't say anything, just stared at her. Emma's pulse quickened. You want my help? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't think you fully understand what I do. It's not as simple as explaining it. There are things I can't talk about, Emma. Emma felt her heart sink, but she refused to back down. I know. But I'm not asking for classified stuff. I just want to learn more. I want to show people that NASA isn't a joke. That what you do isn't a joke. I'm not going to let them make fun of me anymore. Jacob set his fork down with a sigh. Emma, I don't want you to think this is easy. I don't want you to put all your hope into something you might not understand. This job, it's complicated, and sometimes, the pressure is overwhelming. Emma looked him in the eye, her resolve unwavering. I don't care about the pressure. I just want to understand. I want to show everyone who I really am, and who you really are. For a long moment, Jacob said nothing. Then, with a slow exhale, he nodded. All right. I'll help you. But you have to promise me something, Em. Promise me that you'll understand when things get tough. And that you won't stop. Emma's heart raced as she nodded eagerly. I promise, Dad. I won't stop. And just like that, everything started to change. Emma knew that the journey ahead would be anything but easy. But with her dad's support, and the fire that had been lit inside her, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was just the beginning. The days after Emma's conversation with her father felt like a whirlwind. They spent hours together after school, with Jacob teaching Emma about NASA's work in small, digestible pieces, enough to make her understand the complexity and awe of the work he did, without going into classified details. His reluctance had softened, and it was clear that he respected Emma's determination, even if it was hard for him to completely open up. For the first time, Emma felt a connection to her father's world. As she sat beside him in the small home office he had converted for his occasional work-from-home days, she listened intently as he explained how satellites were launched into space, the role of data analysis, and even the way the engineers worked together on the International Space Station. It wasn't just about rockets or technology, it was about people, and how they worked together to solve problems that seemed impossible. Emma's excitement grew with each new lesson. The pieces of her project came together in a way that she never thought possible. She was no longer just gathering information for the science fair, she was on a mission to prove herself. To prove that she could be more than the girl who everyone mocked. She was determined to take her father's legacy and make it her own. But just when Emma thought things were finally coming together, the emotional weight of everything started to catch up with her. One afternoon, she sat down with her project, reviewing the information she had gathered, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from Sophie. "Sophie, Emma, can I talk to you about something? I need your help." Emma quickly typed a response. "Emma, of course, what's up?" "Sophie, I've been thinking. I don't know if I can help with your project anymore. Some people are saying things. About you. About your dad. I don't know if I can handle it anymore." Emma stared at the screen for a moment. Her heart sank. Was Sophie, her best friend, really doubting her now too? She quickly called Sophie, her fingers shaking as she pressed the phone to her ear. "Sophie." Emma's voice was shaky. "What do you mean? Why would you back out?" Sophie's voice was hesitant, distant. "I don't want to hurt you, Em. But there's just so much going on at school. People are starting to pick on me for hanging out with you. I don't know if I can take it anymore. I don't know if I can keep standing by you while everyone's laughing at us." Emma felt the weight of Sophie's words press down on her. The girl who had always supported her, who had stood by her through thick and thin, was now questioning their friendship. "But Sophie, I'm doing this for us, for both of us. I thought we were in this together. Don't you see? This is our chance to prove that what they're saying isn't true. That I'm not lying, that I'm not just a joke." There was a long pause before Sophie spoke again. "I know, Em. I know it's important to you. But I'm not sure I can handle it. I'm not sure I can deal with being laughed at anymore." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes, the sting of rejection cutting deeper than she expected. Sophie was supposed to be her ally, her closest friend. Yet here she was, on the verge of giving up. "I understand, Sophie," Emma whispered, though her voice cracked. "I get it. You don't have to stay if it's too hard. But please, don't leave me. I'm sorry, Emma. I wish I could do more." "I really do," Sophie said, her voice breaking. I can't right now." The line went dead, and Emma was left in the silence of her room, her mind racing. Her friend, her only real friend, was pulling away from her. Was this the price she had to pay for pursuing her dream? For trying to prove herself? Was it worth it if it meant losing everything? A deep sadness settled over Emma as she looked down at her project. She had spent so much time working on it, pouring everything into it, but now it felt like she was all alone. Her heart ached for her dad's approval, for Sophie's friendship, for the validation she had longed for from her peers. But now, it seemed like nothing was going to be enough. She closed her eyes, fighting the tears threatening to spill over. For a moment, she felt like giving up. Why keep going? What was the point? Just then, her dad knocked softly on her door. "Emma? You okay?" She sniffled, wiping her eyes quickly. Yeah, just, tired. Jacob stepped into the room, his eyes scanning her face, knowing something was off. I can tell something's bothering you. Do you want to talk about it? Emma hesitated, but then the floodgates opened. The tears she had been holding back finally spilled over, and she found herself sobbing in her father's arms. I'm failing, Dad, she cried. Everyone's laughing at me. Sophie's pulling away. No one believes in me. I can't do this alone. Jacob held her tightly, letting her cry. His arms around her felt like the only thing keeping her from falling apart. You're not alone, Emma. You never will be. It's hard, I know. People will always doubt you, always try to make you feel small. But you have something they don't. You have the strength to keep going. And that's all that matters. Emma sniffled, looking up at him with tear-streaked cheeks. But what if it's not enough? What if I'm not enough? You are more than enough, Jacob said softly, his voice filled with love. And I'm so proud of you. You've come so far already. I know you're scared, and I know it feels like everything is falling apart. But trust me, you are capable of so much more than you realize. As Emma stared into her father's eyes, something inside her clicked. He believed in her. He had always believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. And that belief, his unwavering faith, was the spark that reignited her determination. I won't give up, Dad, Emma whispered, her voice filled with newfound resolve. I'll show them. I'll show everyone what I'm capable of. Jacob smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I know you will. And I'll be right here beside you every step of the way. With those words, Emma felt a renewed sense of hope. She wasn't alone. She had her dad. And even though Sophie had stepped away, there were still people who cared about her and believed in her. And that, she realized, was all she needed to keep moving forward. As she wiped her eyes and looked at her project again, the next step became clear. It wasn't just about the science fair anymore. It was about proving to herself that she was more than the girl they all thought she was. And that, no matter how tough it got, she would never stop chasing her dreams. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions, effort, and late nights working on the project. Emma found herself walking a fine line between hope and despair. With each passing day, the project became more real, more important to her than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just a science fair project anymore, it was her personal battle, her way of proving not just to the world but to herself that she was capable of more than what people saw. Her father's help was invaluable. He would sit with her, explaining the intricacies of space exploration, discussing the engineering marvels he worked on. Slowly, Emma began to understand just how significant his work was and how it could be translated into a presentation that would make everyone stop and listen. They worked together late into the night, the glow of their computer screens casting shadows on the walls, as Emma meticulously planned out every detail of her display. She had taken the time to research space exploration from the ground up, integrating real data, real images, and real technology. But just as her project was beginning to take shape, something else began to stir in her life, something she wasn't quite prepared for. It started with a subtle shift. Sophie had stopped texting Emma altogether. At first, Emma assumed it was just school-related stress, but after a week of silence, she began to feel the weight of the distance growing between them. Her friend was no longer there to cheer her on, to share in the excitement of the project. It hurt more than Emma cared to admit, but she pushed the pain aside, focusing on the one thing that gave her clarity, the project. She couldn't let herself be distracted. Then, the phone call came. It was late on a Wednesday evening, just as Emma was wrapping up her work for the night. She glanced at her phone, seeing Sophie's name flash across the screen. Emma's heart raced. Had Sophie finally reached out to apologize? She took a deep breath and picked up the phone. Hello. Emma, it's me, Sophie. Her voice sounded strained, like she was on the verge of tears. We need to talk. Emma sat up straighter, the weight of Sophie's words hanging in the air. What's going on, Sophie? I've been worried. You've barely been talking to me. I know. I'm sorry, Em. I didn't mean to push you away, but I don't know how to handle all of this. I see what you're doing with your project, and I admire your determination, but I just can't keep pretending that everything's okay. The things people are saying, it's all too much. I feel like I'm in the middle of it all, and I don't know where I belong anymore. Emma's chest tightened. She had been bracing for this moment for weeks, but hearing Sophie's voice crack in such a raw way made everything more real, more painful. Sophie. I get it. I do. But this is my dream, my chance to prove myself. And you were the one who told me to go for it. I thought we were in this together. Now it feels like I'm losing you. I know, Em, and I don't want to lose you either, Sophie said, her voice softening. But I feel like I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't know how to support you when everyone else is laughing. I don't know if I can do it anymore. The words stung, but Emma refused to let them break her. She had already been knocked down so many times, but this was different. She wasn't going to let Sophie's doubts tear her apart. I'm not asking you to stand up for me or fight my battles, Sophie, Emma said, her voice firm. I just need you to understand that I have to do this. I have to finish what I started. I have to show everyone who I really am. Sophie was silent for a long moment, and Emma could hear the soft sound of her breathing on the other end of the line. I don't know if I can be a part of it, Em, Sophie whispered finally. But I hope you succeed. I really do. And I hope you understand, this isn't about you. It's about me not being strong enough to stand up to the pressure. I understand, Emma replied quietly. And if you ever change your mind, I'll be here. But I'm still going forward with this. I'm not backing down. After a long pause, Sophie spoke again, her voice quieter this time. I'll always be cheering for you, Em. Just, don't forget about me. I won't forget, Emma said softly. I never will. With that, they ended the call, and Emma was left in the silence of her room once again. But this time, the silence wasn't as suffocating. She had made peace with the fact that not everyone would be able to understand her journey. Sophie's departure, though painful, wasn't the end. It was just one more hurdle to overcome, one more challenge to face. Emma took a deep breath and turned back to her project. It was almost finished. She could feel it in her bones, this was her moment. The day of the science fair arrived, and Emma stood in front of her display, her heart racing. It was a simple setup, a table with images of space exploration, models of rockets and satellites, and a timeline of key moments in NASA's history. But what made it stand out was the video Emma had put together. Using the footage her father had shared with her, she had compiled clips of real rocket launches, astronauts in space, and the scientists behind the missions. It wasn't just a project about space, it was a story of human ingenuity, of dreams turned into reality. Her classmates had gathered around, some skeptical, others curious. The whispers were still there, but Emma didn't care. She stood tall, her eyes fixed on her project. She had put everything into this. Every late night, every hour of research, every word of support from her dad, it all came down to this moment. As the judges approached, Emma took a deep breath and began to speak, explaining the significance of each piece of her display. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. She talked about the people who worked behind the scenes, the ones who made the impossible possible. She spoke about the challenges NASA faced, about the importance of dreams, and the power of perseverance. She told them what it meant to her to stand there and share her dad's world with them. When she was done, the judges exchanged glances, nodding in approval. One of them, a man in his mid-40s with glasses, turned to Emma with a smile. You did a fantastic job. This is one of the most comprehensive and passionate presentations we've seen today. Emma's heart swelled with pride, but she kept her composure. She had done it. She had shown them all what she was capable of. As the fair came to a close and the students began to pack up, Emma stood by her display, waiting for the results. She was no longer concerned about winning. It was no longer about the trophy or the recognition. It was about proving to herself that she had the strength to rise above the doubts, the mockery, and the loneliness. And when the results were finally announced, Emma's heart leaped in her chest. First place. Her project had won. But more than that, Emma had won something even more important, her own belief in herself. The moment Emma heard her name called for first place, everything around her seemed to fade away. The applause was distant, muffled by the rush of emotions flooding her chest. It wasn't the trophy that mattered in that instant, but the validation, the proof that everything she had endured, every moment of doubt, every tear, had been worth it. She stepped forward, her legs slightly unsteady, and accepted the blue ribbon from one of the judges. The moment she touched the cool fabric, she realized how much more than a prize it represented. It symbolized her journey, the path from rejection and ridicule to self-belief and achievement. But when Emma returned to her display, her heart felt a little heavier. The weight of Sophie's absence was still there, lingering like an unspoken truth. It wasn't that Emma didn't value the recognition, she did. She had worked tirelessly for it. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was missing from the moment. Emma, that was amazing. Jacob's voice cut through her thoughts as he approached with a broad grin. I knew you had it in you. I'm so proud of you. Emma smiled, her eyes momentarily brightening at the sight of her dad. He had been with her every step of the way, supporting her, encouraging her when things seemed too tough to handle. He had shown her the real meaning of perseverance, not just through his work at NASA, but through his actions at home, where he had been a constant source of strength. But even as Jacob hugged her, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that there was an emptiness within her. The absence of Sophie, the one person who had been there since the beginning, still weighed heavily on her heart. She turned to her dad, biting her lip as she asked softly, Dad, do you think I could have done this without you? Jacob paused, looking at her with a warmth in his eyes that spoke volumes. Emma, you did this. I just helped you see the possibilities, but the strength to keep going, that was all you. I'm proud of you, not just for this project, but for what you've become along the way. Emma nodded, the lump in her throat growing as her eyes watered. It feels like everything's changing, Dad. I don't know where I stand with some people anymore. I know, Jacob said gently, his hand resting on her shoulder. But remember, sometimes the people who matter the most aren't the ones standing next to you in the spotlight. It's the ones who've always believed in you, even when it was hard to believe in yourself. Emma looked up at him, blinking back the tears. She knew what he meant. Sophie might not have been by her side that day, but there were people who truly understood her. Her dad, her family, the quiet support of those who had always seen her potential, they were the ones who counted. The rest? Well, they could laugh and doubt all they wanted, but they hadn't walked this journey with her. They hadn't faced the challenges she had, and they didn't know the depth of her strength. The next few days were a whirlwind of congratulations and questions about her win. Emma basked in the praise, but in the back of her mind, she still wondered about Sophie. She missed her friend, and she wasn't sure how to reconcile their strained relationship. It hurt, but she didn't know how to fix it. It seemed like Sophie wasn't ready to reconnect, and that uncertainty lingered. Then, one afternoon, as Emma walked out of her last class for the day, she spotted Sophie standing by her locker. Her friend looked hesitant, as though she was unsure if she should approach. Emma's heart skipped a beat. This was the moment Sophie might decide to talk to her again. Taking a deep breath, Emma walked toward her. Sophie, she called softly. Sophie's eyes met hers, and there was a flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe, or regret. She bit her lip, then spoke. I saw your project presentation, Emma. I I didn't know it would be like that. I didn't know how much work you had put into it. I was wrong to doubt you. Emma's heart ached, but it wasn't in anger. It was a soft ache, like a wound that had healed but still left a scar. Sophie, it's okay. I understand why you did what you did. It wasn't easy for you, either. Sophie nodded, her voice quiet. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I didn't handle it well. I should have been there for you, especially when you needed me most. I let my fear get the best of me. Emma smiled gently. I get it. We're not always perfect. But I'm glad we're talking. I missed you, Sophie. Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes as she stepped forward, pulling Emma into a tight hug. I'm so sorry, Emma. I was scared, and I let it get in the way of our friendship. But I'm proud of you, and I want you to know that, no matter what, I've got your back. Emma squeezed Sophie back, feeling the warmth of the hug wrap around her like a blanket. And I've got yours. Always. From that moment, everything felt different. It wasn't a grand declaration, but the understanding between them was enough. They weren't going to let fear and doubt drive a wedge between them again. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but they both knew they could face it together. As Emma stood there, wrapped in her friend's arms, she realized something important. Winning the science fair was a big deal, yes. But the real victory was in the relationships she had, her family, her friends, the ones who believed in her, even when she had trouble believing in herself. And in that moment, with Sophie by her side and her father's words in her heart, Emma knew that no matter what challenges life threw her way, she would be able to face them. Not because of her achievements, but because she had people who loved and supported her. And that, Emma realized, was the greatest strength of all. The months that followed Emma's victory at the science fair felt like a blur. The excitement of winning faded, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of everyday life. Yet, every now and then, Emma would catch herself reflecting on the journey, the doubts, the late nights, the loneliness, and the eventual triumph. It was the kind of experience that changed a person, and she could feel herself evolving, becoming someone stronger, more certain of who she was and what she wanted. But even as Emma grew, so did the complexities of her relationships. She had mended things with Sophie, which helped her feel grounded again. Their bond, though strained, was resilient, forged in the fire of conflict and misunderstanding. Sophie had promised to support her, and Emma knew that her friend was doing her best, even if she sometimes felt unsure. Emma appreciated Sophie's effort, and their friendship began to settle into something more authentic and deeper than before. Still, things weren't perfect. Emma's relationship with her classmates remained somewhat rocky. She hadn't expected them to suddenly warm up to her after the science fair, but there was a lingering tension that she couldn't ignore. It wasn't that they were overtly mean or cruel, it was more subtle. The occasional whisper, the sideways glances, the odd comment here and there, it all added up. Emma often caught herself wondering if it would ever be different, if she would ever be truly accepted. But then, she reminded herself that these people, who had once laughed at her, didn't define her. She had proven to herself that she was capable of something greater than their opinions. And then there was her father. Jacob had always been the steady presence in Emma's life. He had been her rock, always there with words of wisdom and encouragement. But lately, Emma noticed a shift in him, something she couldn't quite place. He seemed more distant at times, more wrapped up in his work at NASA. There were fewer late-night conversations, fewer moments where he would sit with her in the kitchen and help her with school projects, as he had in the past. One evening, as Emma sat down to dinner, she noticed her dad wasn't in his usual chair. Instead, her mom sat across from her, a worried expression on her face. Emma hesitated, putting down her fork. "Mom. Where's Dad? Is everything okay?" Her mom took a deep breath and set down her glass of water. "Your dad's been working late a lot recently. He's been given some important projects at NASA, and he's been under a lot of pressure. But it's more than that, Emma. He's been distant. I think he's struggling. Emma's stomach twisted with concern. Struggling? But he always seems so strong. He never shows it. Her mom nodded, her eyes clouding with worry. I think your dad feels like he's been losing control. He's always been the one who fixes things, but lately, he's been overwhelmed. It's not just his work, it's everything. I think he's afraid of not being able to be the father he wants to be for you. Emma's heart ached. She had always seen her dad as invincible, someone who could handle anything life threw his way. To hear her mother speak about him in this way made Emma realize that even the strongest people had their moments of vulnerability. It made her question how much she really knew about the pressures her dad faced. The next day, Emma decided to talk to him. She found him in his office, hunched over his computer screen, the soft hum of machinery in the background. The room was cluttered with papers and blueprints, evidence of the many projects he had been juggling. Dad? Emma's voice broke the silence. Jacob looked up, surprised to see her standing in the doorway. Hey, Em. Everything okay? Emma hesitated, then took a seat next to him. I wanted to talk to you. Mom said you've been struggling. That you've been under a lot of pressure. Is that true? Jacob's expression softened, and he leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. Yeah, Em. I've been working on some pretty big projects. The kind of stuff that makes you question whether you're doing enough. And when I'm not working, I feel like I'm missing out on being there for you. I'm not doing a good job balancing everything. Emma's heart clenched. She had never seen her father like this, vulnerable, unsure. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Dad, I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here. I'm proud of you, and I know that you're doing your best. But you don't have to carry all of this alone. Jacob smiled, the weight on his shoulders easing just a bit. Thanks, Emma. I needed to hear that. For the rest of the evening, they spent time together, nothing extraordinary, just the quiet comfort of being in the same room. Emma realized that, just like her dad was learning to navigate the complexities of life, to find a balance between ambition and family. He wasn't infallible, but he was trying. And that was enough. The following days were a reminder that life was a series of ups and downs, of moments of triumph and times of struggle. Emma had learned that nothing, not even success, could shield you from the inevitable difficulties that came with growing up. But she also learned something incredibly important, that perseverance wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up, time and time again, no matter how hard life seemed. She had faced ridicule, doubt, and loneliness, but she had also found the strength within herself to rise above it all. She had learned to trust in her abilities, to believe in herself when others didn't, and to reach out to those who cared for her. And in doing so, she had learned that the road to success wasn't just about achieving goals, it was about the lessons you learned along the way, and the people who helped you become who you were meant to be. And as she sat next to her dad that evening, watching the sun set through the window, Emma knew that no matter what lay ahead, she had already won the most important battle of all, the battle to believe in herself. It had been a few weeks since Emma and her dad had shared that quiet, heart-to-heart conversation. Things at home had started to feel more balanced, and the tension that had once seemed to hang in the air like an unspoken storm had begun to fade. Emma continued to push herself, trying to balance schoolwork, personal growth, and her deepening relationships. But as the days rolled on, she began to notice something shifting within her, not just with her family, but within herself. One afternoon, Emma was sitting in the school cafeteria, talking to Sophie about an upcoming project when she heard it. Did you hear? They're getting a new principal. Sophie glanced over her shoulder, lowering her voice. I heard. They're bringing in someone from a really prestigious school district. They're supposed to be strict, real no-nonsense type. Emma raised an eyebrow, feeling a twinge of concern. Strict? Why do they need that here? Sophie shrugged. I don't know. Maybe they think the school needs more discipline. I heard rumors that this principal's going to be tough on everything, grades, behavior, even how we dress. A lot of kids are nervous. Emma's thoughts wandered as she mulled over the idea. A new principal meant change, and change could be unsettling. The idea of an outsider coming in and shaking things up didn't sit well with her, but she couldn't ignore the underlying fear it triggered in the back of her mind. What if this principal's tough approach affected her and her friends in ways they didn't anticipate? As the weeks passed, the buzz about the new principal grew louder. Students whispered about the strict rules, about the way this person would supposedly turn the school around. Emma heard stories of previous schools they had worked at, where they had reportedly made a name for themselves by cracking down on misbehavior and enforcing rigid standards. The rumors painted a picture of someone who wasn't interested in compromise or understanding. They were coming in with a mission, to make the school better at any cost. The day of the new principal's arrival came quicker than Emma expected. A chill of uncertainty settled over the entire school. Emma could feel the nervous energy in the hallways, the students' whispers, the glances exchanged. Sophie wasn't sure how to feel about it either. "Do you think it's going to be that bad?" Sophie asked as they walked to class together. "I mean, I get that we need some discipline, but I don't know if we need a dictator running the show." Emma didn't have an answer. She was skeptical, too, but she didn't want to assume anything before she'd even met the new principal. After all, there were a lot of rumors to sift through, and who knew? Maybe they wouldn't be as bad as people made them out to be. The bell rang, signaling the start of the day's assembly, and Emma reluctantly filed into the gym with the rest of the school. The bleachers were filled with murmurs and the occasional burst of laughter, a nervous energy permeating the room as everyone waited for the principal to make their debut. The gym doors opened, and in walked the new principal, a tall, authoritative figure dressed in a sharply pressed suit. Their expression was unreadable, but Emma could sense the weight of their gaze as they surveyed the crowd. There was something intimidating about their presence, something that immediately commanded attention. The principal stepped up to the microphone, adjusting it with a practiced hand. "Good morning, students," their voice rang out, clear and confident. "I'm Principal Carter. I'm here to ensure that we are all on the path to success, individually and as a school. Success is not given. It is earned. And I believe that each and every one of you has the potential to achieve greatness." A few students shifted uncomfortably, and Emma could feel the tension rise. It wasn't the words so much as the way they were spoken, strong, unyielding, almost like a challenge. Principal Carter continued. "I expect discipline, respect, and hard work from everyone. There will be no room for excuses. You will all rise to the occasion, or there will be consequences. This is not about being harsh, this is about preparing you for the real world." Emma exchanged a glance with Sophie. There it was, the strictness. But beneath the stern words, Emma could also sense something else, a desire to make an impact. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was something about Principal Carter's demeanor that suggested they weren't just here to wield authority. They were here to push everyone to be better, whether they wanted it or not. As the speech went on, Emma's mind wandered. She wasn't sure whether she should be alarmed or inspired. On the one hand, it was clear that Principal Carter had expectations, and they weren't going to be lenient. On the other hand, there was something undeniably compelling about their vision. Success wasn't handed out. It had to be earned. Maybe there was truth in that. The assembly ended, and Emma couldn't shake the mixed feelings swirling inside her. The rest of the day passed in a blur, with teachers mentioning the new rules and the increased expectations. Emma heard snippets of conversation as she passed through the halls. Some students were excited about the change, others were angry. The tension was palpable. That evening, Emma sat at her desk, staring at the assignment for her next class. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Principal Carter. She understood the importance of discipline, of hard work. But the idea of constant pressure, the weight of expectations, was something she wasn't sure she was ready for. It was then that she remembered her father's words. The ones he had said during their conversation about perseverance, about how it wasn't about never struggling, but about finding the strength to push forward when things got tough. Maybe Principal Carter wasn't a threat. Maybe, just like her dad, they were trying to push everyone beyond their limits. Maybe this was their way of challenging her and everyone else to rise to the occasion. Emma exhaled slowly, feeling a surge of resolve within herself. She had faced challenges before, this was no different. Whatever Principal Carter had in store for the school, Emma knew she was ready. It wasn't about the pressure, it was about how she handled it. And so, with a sense of quiet determination, Emma set her mind to face whatever came next. She was no longer the same girl who had been laughed at in the cafeteria. She was someone who had learned that success wasn't easy, but it was always worth fighting for. The days after Principal Carter's arrival seemed to blur into one another. The new rules and expectations were in full swing, and Emma could feel the weight of them pressing down on her and her classmates. There was no room for slack. Homework assignments had become more demanding, and the teachers were stricter, making it clear that any sign of weakness would be noticed. Emma, who had always prided herself on doing her best, found herself struggling to keep up. She had always been someone who thrived under pressure, but there was something about Principal Carter's relentless drive that felt different. It was no longer just about doing well, it was about perfection. Every mistake felt like it could cost her something important. She could sense the tension in the hallways, in the classrooms, and in her own mind. It was exhausting. Sophie, who had always been Emma's sounding board, seemed to be handling it a little differently. She was always quick to crack a joke, but Emma noticed that Sophie's laughter had a forced quality to it lately. They had always shared a lot of the same feelings about school, but Emma could tell that Sophie was trying to distance herself from the stress, almost as if she was afraid of confronting it. One afternoon, as they sat together in the library, Sophie slammed her book down with frustration. "I can't take it anymore, Em. This is ridiculous. I'm so tired of feeling like I'm always on the edge of failing. It's like nothing I do is good enough for Carter. Have you seen the way they look at us in the halls? Like we're all just beneath them." Emma felt a pang of sympathy. "I know. I'm starting to feel it too. But we've got to push through this. It's not going to last forever, right?" Sophie's eyes darkened, and she shook her head. "I don't know, Em. I'm starting to feel like it's all just too much. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this." Emma's heart clenched. She had never heard Sophie talk like this before. Sophie had always been the one who believed in pushing forward, in fighting against the odds. But now, it seemed like the pressure was getting to her. "What do you mean? You've always been able to handle this kind of stuff," Emma said, trying to reassure her friend. "I don't know, Em," Sophie muttered, her voice low. "I think I'm just done. I feel like I'm constantly failing. And the more I try, the more Carter just expects. It's like there's no end to it. No matter how much I do, it's never enough." Emma reached out, placing a hand on Sophie's arm. "Hey, don't say that. We've been through so much together. We're not giving up now." Sophie met her eyes, but there was a sadness in her gaze that Emma couldn't ignore. "I don't know if I can keep doing this, Em. It's like I'm running a race, and I'm always falling behind." Emma swallowed hard. She had always been the one to keep going, to push through when things got tough, but seeing Sophie like this, broken, on the verge of giving up, made her question everything she had believed in. Was it really worth it? Was the pressure worth it if it made her closest friend feel like she couldn't keep up? The next few days felt like a constant grind. Emma tried to keep her head above water, but it was difficult. She was staying up late to finish assignments, barely sleeping, and still feeling like it wasn't enough. The strain was beginning to show on her, too. She'd snap at her parents over small things, and her patience with Sophie was wearing thin, even though she didn't want to admit it. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the overwhelming weight of their new reality. But it wasn't just the pressure of school. Emma was starting to see cracks in her relationship with her dad. Jacob had been so focused on his work at NASA that he barely had time for anything else. The nights they used to spend talking had become increasingly rare. Even when they did spend time together, there was an unspoken distance between them. Emma missed their connection, the sense of calm he had always provided, but she didn't know how to bridge the gap. One evening, as Emma sat in her room, struggling with her homework, her mom knocked gently on the door. "Can we talk?" her mom asked. Emma nodded, setting down her pen. She'd been feeling isolated, and the last thing she wanted was to push her mom away. "Of course." Her mom sat down on the edge of her bed, her expression soft yet concerned. "I know things have been hard lately," she began. "With school and everything going on with your dad's work. I can see you're stressed." Emma sighed, rubbing her eyes. "I don't even know how to explain it. It's just so much. I feel like I'm drowning, and the more I try to keep up, the more everything falls apart." Her mom reached over, pulling her into a hug. "Sweetheart, I know you're trying your best, but you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You don't have to be perfect, you know." Emma pulled back, shaking her head. "But I feel like I have to be. Everyone expects me to do everything right. If I fail at one thing, it feels like I fail at everything. And with Dad, he's so focused on his work that it's like we're drifting apart." Her mom's eyes softened, and she placed a gentle hand on Emma's cheek. "I understand. But you're not alone in this. Your dad is trying his best, too. He's just struggling with everything he's balancing right now. You both need each other, but you have to allow each other to be human." Emma nodded, the weight in her chest easing a little. "I know. I just wish things could go back to the way they were. It's hard to see Dad like this, and it's hard to keep pushing when I feel like I'm failing at everything." Her mom smiled gently. "You're not failing. You're just learning how to navigate through hard times. Sometimes, that's the hardest thing we can do. But it's okay to ask for help when you need it, Emma. You don't have to do this alone." Emma's heart felt lighter. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was okay to admit that she couldn't do it all on her own. Maybe the hardest part of perseverance wasn't pushing through the struggle, it was knowing when to lean on the people who cared about you. She realized that, just like with Sophie, she needed to talk to her dad. She needed to find a way to reconnect with him and remind him that they were a team. Hit subscribe and leave a comment. Have you ever felt like you were carrying the weight of the world? How did you learn to handle it? Sometimes, the key is realizing that we're not meant to do everything alone. Let's talk about it. It had been several days since that conversation with her mom, and Emma had thought a lot about what she had said. Maybe she had been too hard on herself. Maybe she'd been so focused on doing everything perfectly that she hadn't noticed the cracks forming in her relationships with those who mattered the most, her dad, her best friend, and even herself. After a long week filled with tests, assignments, and more of Principal Carter's increasing demands, Emma finally decided that it was time to take a step back. She couldn't keep going at the pace she was without it taking a toll on her mental health. She realized that she needed to find balance again, she couldn't just keep pushing forward blindly. It was Friday night when Emma decided to reach out to her dad. She had been avoiding him a bit. His work at NASA had become more demanding lately, and she'd felt a strange distance between them. She could see how hard he was working, but in doing so, he had become more of a shadow in the house. They used to have long talks late at night, but those had become fewer and farther between. She missed him. She missed their connection. Emma stood in the doorway of his office, watching him as he worked, the glow of the computer screen illuminating his face. He was so absorbed in whatever he was doing that he didn't notice her standing there for a moment. She hesitated, wondering if it was the right time, but then, as if a weight had been lifted, she stepped into the room. "Dad," she said softly. Jacob looked up, a smile briefly lighting up his tired face. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" I wanted to talk, she said, her voice quieter than she expected. Jacob motioned for her to come closer. Sure. What's on your mind? Emma took a deep breath and sat down in the chair across from him. I've been feeling a little off lately, she confessed. School is harder than usual, and everything feels like it's piling up. And with you being so busy with NASA. I don't know, I feel like we're not really connecting anymore. Jacob looked at her, his expression softening. He set his pen down and turned his full attention to her. I had a feeling something was going on. I've been so wrapped up in my work lately, Emma. I didn't realize how much I've been neglecting you. I'm sorry for that. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. It's okay. I know your work is important, but I miss spending time with you. I miss when we talk about stuff. I know you're busy, but I don't want to lose that connection. And honestly, I've been feeling like I'm losing myself in all of this. I don't know how to keep it together sometimes. Jacob's face softened, and he leaned forward. I understand, Em. I've been so focused on my projects that I forgot what really matters, your happiness. I want to be here for you, to help you. I know I haven't been the best at that lately, but I promise I'll do better. We can find a balance. You don't have to handle everything on your own. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had been carrying this burden, trying to prove to herself that she could manage everything, school, life, and the unspoken gap between her and her dad. But now, talking openly with him, she realized that she didn't have to carry it all by herself. Thanks, Dad, she said quietly, feeling the tension in her chest ease. It means a lot. Jacob smiled, reaching over to give her hand a reassuring squeeze. We'll figure it out together. You're not alone in this, Em. As they sat together, Emma could feel the bond between them start to mend. They still had a long way to go, but this was a start. She realized that it wasn't about avoiding the pressure or ignoring her own struggles, it was about having the courage to ask for help when she needed it and to lean on the people who cared about her. The following Monday, Emma felt a strange sense of clarity. She still had a mountain of work ahead of her, and Principal Carter's demands hadn't eased up, but something had shifted inside her. She wasn't just going through the motions anymore, she had a renewed sense of purpose. Sophie, too, seemed different. Emma had reached out to her over the weekend, and the two of them had spent hours talking, sharing their frustrations and fears. It was exactly what they needed, an honest, unfiltered conversation about how hard things had been. Sophie had admitted that she, too, had been struggling, but together, they had made a pact, to support each other no matter how tough things got. They weren't in this alone. The school week started off just as intense as the one before, but Emma found herself taking it all in stride. She had a plan, she was going to tackle her assignments with focus, but also with balance. She would take breaks, spend time with her friends, and allow herself moments to relax. Perfection wasn't the goal anymore, progress was. In class, she noticed that Principal Carter's eyes still had the same unyielding gaze, but Emma wasn't intimidated. She didn't feel the need to prove herself to them anymore. She had already proven enough to herself. Her value wasn't based on a perfect grade or meeting every expectation. At the end of the day, Emma found herself sitting at the same lunch table with Sophie, laughing at one of Sophie's offbeat jokes. It was the same lunch table they'd sat at countless times before. But this time, there was a sense of peace, a sense that they were in this together, no matter what. Emma could already feel the change. That evening, after school, she sat with her dad, watching one of their favorite movies. It was the first time in weeks that they'd shared a quiet evening together, no work, no stress. Just a simple moment of connection. It was enough to remind Emma that life was about these moments, the ones where you feel seen, heard, and loved. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to keep moving forward, one step at a time. As Emma moved through the following week, she found herself more aware of the subtle shifts happening around her. It was like she had pressed reset on her life and started to understand that the relentless pursuit of perfection wasn't the path to happiness, it was balance. She was embracing the idea that strength didn't always come from doing everything alone, it came from reaching out, from trusting those who cared about her. Her dad had kept his promise. The late-night work sessions had lessened, and now, they spent more time together, even if it was just sitting in the living room, discussing things that had nothing to do with NASA or school. It was comforting, grounding, and Emma realized how much she had missed those quiet moments. They weren't talking about big issues, they were talking about everything and nothing, just as they had before. But the most surprising change came from Sophie. After their long heart-to-heart over the weekend, Sophie seemed to have found her own sense of peace. The weight she'd carried around, the pressure to be perfect and to succeed, had been lightened by their conversation. Emma noticed that Sophie was smiling more in school, joking around, and even laughing at the most ridiculous things. It was like a breath of fresh air, a reminder that despite the chaos surrounding them, it was still possible to find joy in the small things. On Monday morning, as they sat in homeroom waiting for the bell to ring, Sophie leaned over and whispered, "Okay, so I've got a crazy idea." Emma arched an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "I think we should start a study group," Sophie said, grinning. "Like a real one. Not one where everyone just complains and gets distracted. We'll make it fun. A safe place where we can all work through stuff together. No judgment, just support. And, of course, snacks." Emma smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about surviving school anymore. It was about creating a space where they could thrive. She could already picture it, Sophie and the others, working together, laughing at their inside jokes, and getting through the tough parts of school as a team. "I love it," Emma said, her eyes sparkling. "Let's do it." And so, the next day, they put their plan into action. Sophie sent out a group text to a few of their friends, and by the end of the week, they had a study group going. It wasn't just about academic support, it was about creating a community. A place where they could share their struggles and triumphs, where they could take breaks and eat snacks, and most importantly, where they could lean on each other. It was a safe space that made the intense school environment feel just a little more bearable. At first, Principal Carter wasn't thrilled about the idea. When he heard that the students had formed a group, he requested a meeting with Emma and Sophie. "While I appreciate the initiative," he said, sitting behind his desk with an expression that made him look even more intimidating than usual, "I don't want any distractions in my school. You've all got enough on your plates already. A study group could be just another way for students to slack off and waste time." Sophie, never one to back down from a challenge, stood her ground. "We're not wasting time, Mr. Carter. We're building a support system for each other. If anything, it'll help us stay on top of our work and get through this year together." Emma nodded in agreement. "We're not looking to cause any trouble. We just want to make school a little easier for everyone. We're all under a lot of stress, and having a place to talk about it helps." Principal Carter studied them for a moment, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he finally sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Fine. But I'm keeping an eye on you too. You better make sure this doesn't interfere with schoolwork." "Promise," Emma said, her voice steady, though her heart raced a little. She had expected a battle, but it felt good to stand up for what they believed in. As the days passed, the study group became more than just a way to survive school. It became a refuge. They would meet every Tuesday and Thursday after school in the library. Sometimes they worked on homework, but more often than not, the group would end up talking about everything other than school. They shared their favorite shows, their dreams for the future, and most importantly, their fears about what the next month, semester, or year would bring. And each time they met, Emma saw her friends grow stronger. Sophie, who had once been overwhelmed by the pressure, was now confident, her jokes a little louder, her laugh a little brighter. Ethan, who had always been the quiet one, found his voice. They were all becoming more connected, more aware of each other's struggles and triumphs. Even though Emma knew they were still facing the overwhelming pressure of school, the constant expectations of Principal Carter, and the doubts that sometimes crept into her mind, she also knew that they were no longer facing it alone. She had her friends. She had her family. And for the first time in a long while, Emma was starting to feel like everything was going to be okay. That Friday, Emma sat on the bleachers at the school's football game with Sophie by her side. The stands were filled with excited students, the sound of cheering and music filling the air. It was a rare moment when the school felt alive in a way that wasn't tied to pressure or expectations. It was just a game, just fun. Sophie turned to Emma with a mischievous grin. "So, what do you think about asking Carter for extra credit? You know, for the study group?" Emma laughed, shaking her head. "If anyone could get him to say yes, it'd be you." Sophie winked. "You bet. I'm working on my negotiation skills." Emma chuckled, feeling the familiar warmth of her friendship fill the space between them. There was a time when this moment would have felt distant, impossible. But now, with everything that had happened, her renewed relationship with her dad, the study group, and the support of her friends, Emma felt like she was finally moving forward. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And progress, Emma realized, was enough. The following week, Emma's world took another turn. The study group had been a success, and while Principal Carter's skepticism hadn't entirely disappeared, he had reluctantly acknowledged that their grades had started to improve. But, as with all things, when one challenge was conquered, another appeared on the horizon. It came in the form of an email, a formal invitation to the NASA Student Outreach Program. It wasn't something Emma had expected, and when she first read the subject line, she had to blink a few times to make sure her eyes weren't deceiving her. The email was addressed to her and several other students in her class, but it was clearly something that only a handful of top students would be eligible for. The email detailed an exclusive opportunity to participate in a mentorship program with NASA engineers, researchers, and astronauts. The idea was to introduce students to real-world applications of science and technology through hands-on activities and real-time discussions. There was a catch, of course. The program wasn't going to be free. It required a commitment of time, energy, and a certain level of academic excellence. Emma had heard about it before, through the occasional whispers in the hallway. The kids who had the right grades, the right connections, had been accepted into similar programs. But she had never imagined herself as one of those kids. Her heart raced as she stared at the email. For a moment, she wasn't sure if she should be thrilled or terrified. The thought of being mentored by actual NASA scientists was a dream come true. But, of course, there was also the immense pressure that came with such an opportunity. It would mean more time away from her friends, more hours spent trying to stay ahead of schoolwork, more stress that she wasn't sure she could handle. "Hey, Emma, what's wrong?" Sophie asked, noticing her sudden change in demeanor as they sat together during lunch. Emma hesitated for a second before pulling out her phone and showing Sophie the email. "This came in this morning. I don't know what to do with it." Sophie's eyes widened as she read the details. "Wow. This is huge. You've always wanted something like this, right? I mean, NASA. That's like, next level awesome." "I know," Emma replied, running her fingers through her hair. "But it's a lot of pressure. I've already got so much on my plate, and now this? I don't even know if I have the time or energy to do this, you know." Sophie nodded, understanding the hesitation. "I get it. But don't you think you should at least give it a shot? You're capable of handling more than you think. Plus, you've got the study group now to help you manage everything. You don't have to do it all by yourself." Emma sighed, chewing on her bottom lip. "I guess you're right. But what if I mess it up? What if it's just one more thing I can't keep up with?" Sophie smiled. "If you mess up, you mess up. That's just part of learning. But I honestly think you'll rock it. Just take it one step at a time. You don't have to decide everything right now." As much as Emma wanted to agree with Sophie's optimism, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. She had never been the type of person to take big risks, she preferred the comfort of control, of knowing what was coming next. But this was different. The opportunity was once in a lifetime, and she didn't want to let fear hold her back from it. After a long conversation with her dad that night, Emma realized that the fear she was feeling was normal. "It's okay to be scared, Jacob had said, his voice warm and reassuring. "But sometimes, fear is just a sign that you're about to do something incredible. You're not alone in this. If you need help managing everything, I'm here. You've got your friends and your family. We'll figure it out together." That was all Emma needed to hear. She made her decision. She was going to accept the opportunity. The next morning, she clicked on the reply button and typed a simple message: "Thank you for the opportunity. I would be honored to participate in the NASA mentorship program. Please let me know the next steps." Her finger hovered over the send button for a moment before she took a deep breath and clicked send. The days that followed felt like a whirlwind. Once she had accepted the invitation to the NASA mentorship program, Emma was thrust into a new world. She received further instructions, a list of tasks to complete, and a schedule of meetings that she would have to work around. She also found out that she would be working closely with other students in the program, many of whom had far more experience and knowledge than she did. The pressure was immediate and intense, but Emma was determined to push through. At school, she juggled the demands of both the mentorship program and her normal academic workload. She was running on barely enough sleep, and her friends could see the strain on her face. "You look like you haven't slept in days," Sophie said one afternoon, concern etched on her features. Emma smiled weakly. "It's just a lot to keep up with. I don't want to disappoint anyone. But I don't know how much longer I can do this." Sophie gave her a stern look. "I know you're tough, but you don't have to do this alone. Let us help you. You're not some machine that can run 24/7. We'll cover for you if you need a break." "I don't want to let you guys down," Emma replied. "It feels like if I stop, everything's going to fall apart." Sophie's eyes softened. "Nothing's going to fall apart, Em. We've got your back, always. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time." Emma took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thanks, sophomore. I don't know what I'd do without you." Sophie grinned. "Probably crash and burn by now. But hey, we've got this. Together, okay?" "Together," Emma echoed, feeling the warmth of Sophie's words sink in. She wasn't alone in this. No matter how tough it got, her friends, her family, they were all there to help her through it. The following days were filled with late-night study sessions, phone calls with NASA mentors, and moments of doubt. But with each step, Emma grew more confident. She knew she was still far from perfect, but the support she had from those around her kept her going. And with every new challenge she faced, Emma realized something important: perfection was never the goal. It was about progress, growth, and the willingness to take risks, even when fear seemed to be the loudest voice in the room. She had taken the leap. Now, all she had to do was keep moving forward. As the weeks passed, Emma began to feel the weight of the mentorship program settle deeper into her life. Every day was an endless cycle of homework, NASA assignments, and group meetings. The pressure was intense, and even though her friends were there to support her, she still found herself struggling to balance it all. It wasn't just the schoolwork or the mentorship that weighed heavily on her. It was the expectation. The feeling that everyone was watching her, waiting for her to succeed, or to fail. It was the same feeling she had when she stood in front of her classmates and declared that her dad worked at NASA, only to have everyone laugh. That old feeling of being the one who didn't belong started to creep back in. At lunch one Thursday, Emma sat in the corner of the cafeteria with Sophie, Ethan, and the others, but her mind was elsewhere. She wasn't fully engaged in their conversation. Her phone, constantly buzzing with emails and reminders, had become an extension of herself, something she couldn't escape. She stared at it now, anxiously checking for any new messages from her NASA mentor, Dr. Evans. "Everything okay?" Sophie asked, noticing her distracted demeanor. Emma looked up, forcing a smile. "Yeah, just busy." Sophie didn't seem convinced. She raised an eyebrow, clearly seeing through Emma's facade. "You've been saying that for weeks. It's not just busy, is it? You're not okay, Em. You can't keep pretending like everything's fine when it's not." Emma's breath hitched. She had been trying so hard to keep it all together, to show that she was handling everything, but Sophie was right. She wasn't okay. The pressure was eating away at her, and no matter how hard she tried to manage it, she felt like she was starting to crack. "I don't know what to do anymore," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've got school, the mentorship program, the study group, and I can't let anyone down, but I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. I'm drowning, sophomore." Sophie's expression softened, and she reached across the table to take Emma's hand. "You're not drowning, Em. You're human. And you're allowed to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. We're here for you, always." "I know," Emma said, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I'm the one who signed up for all of this. I can't quit now. What if I disappoint everyone?" Sophie squeezed her hand. "You won't disappoint anyone. Not me, not your dad, and definitely not the people in the study group. They know how hard you're working. It's okay to ask for help. We're in this together, remember?" Emma closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She was so tired. So tired. But Sophie's words lingered in her mind, "You're not alone." The truth of it was that Emma had always been too proud to admit when she needed help. She had this image of herself as someone who could handle anything, who could do it all. But maybe that wasn't who she was meant to be. Maybe she was meant to lean on others when things got tough. "Thanks, Soph," Emma whispered, her voice shaky. "I'll try to ask for help." Just then, her phone buzzed again, and Emma picked it up, glancing at the screen. The message was from Dr. Evans, the NASA mentor. She hesitated, then opened it. "Emma, I've reviewed your latest project submission. I think you're on the right track, but there's room for improvement. I'll be in town next week for a conference, and I'd like to schedule a one-on-one session with you. Please let me know when you're available. We need to discuss your progress in detail." Emma felt a lump form in her throat. Another reminder that the stakes were high. Another expectation to meet. "I have to go meet with Dr. Evans next week," she said quietly, showing Sophie the message. Sophie looked at her with concern but didn't say anything. Instead, she simply nodded. "Okay, Em. We'll figure this out. You don't have to do it all at once. Let's take it one step at a time." Emma nodded, but deep down, the sense of unease didn't go away. She had come so far, but the fear of failure was gnawing at her. The following week was a blur. Between late-night study sessions and preparing for her one-on-one with Dr. Evans, Emma's days felt like they were blending into one another. She was exhausted. And when the day finally came to meet Dr. Evans, Emma felt both excitement and dread in equal measure. She had prepared as much as she could, but she wasn't sure it would be enough. She arrived at the local conference center where Dr. Evans would be speaking. The towering building seemed to mock her, reminding her that she was about to meet someone who had worked for NASA for decades. Someone who probably had all the answers. Someone who expected perfection. When she walked into the room, Dr. Evans was waiting for her at a large conference table, his laptop open, a pile of papers beside him. He looked up as she entered, offering a warm smile that put her at ease, at least a little. "Emma, it's great to finally meet you in person," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Please, have a seat." Emma sat down, her heart racing. Thank you for meeting with me, Dr. Evans. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been following your progress with the project, Dr. Evans said as he pulled up Emma's recent submission on his laptop. I have to say, you've got a lot of potential, but there are some areas where you could improve. Are you ready to dive into some feedback? Emma nodded, trying to push aside the nervousness that had settled in her chest. I'm ready. For the next hour, Dr. Evans went over the details of her work. It wasn't all positive. He pointed out where her research was lacking and where her ideas needed more depth. But his tone was constructive, encouraging. There was no judgment, only guidance. You're on the right track, he said near the end of their meeting. But I think you've been trying to do it all on your own. Don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. And most importantly, trust yourself. You have what it takes, Emma. Her heart swelled with pride, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to relax just a little. Dr. Evans wasn't looking for perfection. He was looking for effort, growth, and a willingness to learn. When the meeting ended, Dr. Evans handed her a small, sealed envelope. This is for you. I think you'll find it interesting. Emma accepted the envelope, her curiosity piqued. She thanked him again before leaving the conference room, a sense of accomplishment flooding her veins. As she opened the envelope in the parking lot, she found a letter of recommendation, signed by Dr. Evans, inviting her to participate in a prestigious NASA summer internship program. It was an incredible opportunity, one that felt almost too good to be true. But in that moment, Emma realized something important: she didn't have to be perfect. She just had to be herself, and that was enough. The letter from Dr. Evans sat on Emma's kitchen counter for days before she could bring herself to open it. It wasn't because she didn't want to read it, it was because she was terrified of what it meant. The invitation to the NASA summer internship was a dream come true, but it also felt like the kind of opportunity that could completely change the course of her life. The weight of the decision felt enormous, like she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. She had never been the type of person to make big decisions quickly. Everything in her life had been planned, structured, carefully mapped out. But this was different. Taking the internship meant she would be spending the summer in another city, away from her family, her friends, and everything that was familiar. It meant pushing herself even harder than she already was, juggling the demands of the program with her own self-doubt. It meant stepping into a world that, for her, had always felt just out of reach. Her dad, Jacob, could see the conflict in her eyes when he found her staring at the letter one afternoon. "What's going on, Em? You've been quiet all day." Emma shrugged, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. "It's the internship. I don't know what to do." Jacob sat down next to her at the kitchen table. "What's holding you back?" "I don't know if I'm ready," Emma admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm already struggling to keep up with everything, and this internship is going to take up so much time. What if I fail? What if I can't do it?" Jacob gave her a thoughtful look. "I think you're underestimating yourself. You've come this far, Em. You've faced a lot of challenges, and you've come out stronger each time. Don't let fear hold you back from something you've worked so hard for. You're ready for this. I believe in you." Emma looked at her dad, feeling the weight of his words sink in. She had always admired his unwavering confidence in her, and his belief in her abilities had always been a source of strength. But this time, the pressure of the decision felt so much heavier. What if I can't balance everything? What if it's too much for me? "You're not alone, Em," Jacob said gently. "You have your family and your friends. We'll help you. If you need a break, you take a break. If you need support, we'll be here. You don't have to do it all by yourself." Emma nodded, though she still wasn't entirely convinced. But hearing her dad's words gave her the courage to at least consider taking the leap. Maybe it was time to step out of her comfort zone. Maybe it was time to take a risk. She spent the next few days reflecting on everything she had accomplished. The study group had made a noticeable difference in her grades. She had gained confidence through her work with NASA, and she had learned so much. This internship wasn't just an opportunity, it was the next step in her journey. If she truly wanted to make a difference, if she truly wanted to pursue her dreams, she couldn't let fear stand in her way. After much deliberation, Emma sat down one night, phone in hand, and composed a reply to Dr. Evans. "Thank you for this incredible opportunity. I am honored to accept the invitation to the NASA Summer Internship Program. I look forward to learning and growing alongside some of the best in the field." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The next morning, she woke up to a new sense of clarity. She had made her decision. She wasn't just doing this for herself, she was doing this for everyone who had ever believed in her, for everyone who had supported her along the way. It was time to stop letting fear hold her back. It was time to step into the future, whatever it might bring. The following weeks were a blur of preparation. Emma's schedule became more hectic than ever as she juggled the demands of school, her study group, and the upcoming internship. She barely had time to breathe, but she refused to let the stress get to her. With every day that passed, she grew more confident in her decision, even as the weight of the unknown loomed large. Her friends could see the transformation happening before their eyes. Emma was still the same person, intelligent, driven, and caring, but now she was starting to embrace the unknown, to take risks, and to believe that she was capable of handling whatever came her way. One afternoon, Sophie, Ethan, and the others took her out for ice cream to celebrate. They sat at a corner booth, laughing and chatting about their plans for the summer. "So, Em, you're really going to do it?" Ethan asked, a grin on his face. "You're actually going to work at NASA? That's insane." Emma smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "Yeah, I'm doing it. I'm scared, but I know it's the right thing for me." Sophie raised her glass. "To Em, for taking the leap. You're going to crush it, we all know it." Emma laughed, feeling a sense of warmth and camaraderie surround her. "Thanks, guys. Honestly, I couldn't have done it without you. You've been there every step of the way." "We're always here for you," Sophie said, her eyes filled with sincerity. "No matter what." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of laughter and conversation, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt truly at ease. The uncertainty still hung in the air, but it no longer felt like something that would pull her under. It was just another challenge to face, and this time, she was ready. As the end of the school year approached, Emma found herself reflecting on everything she had been through. She had started the year uncertain of her abilities, unsure of who she was or what she wanted. But now, as she stood on the brink of something bigger, something she had only ever dreamed of, she realized that she had already come so far. This internship wasn't just about NASA or the incredible opportunities it represented. It was about Emma's journey, a journey of self-discovery, of learning to trust herself, and of finding the strength to take risks, even when the path ahead was unclear. With a deep breath, she stood at the threshold of her future, ready to step forward. Emma's first day of the NASA internship arrived faster than she could have ever anticipated. The anticipation had been building for weeks, and now it was real. As she stepped off the bus and into the sprawling campus where NASA's Johnson Space Center was located, she felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. The building before her seemed larger than life, its modern architecture towering above her, almost as if it were daring her to step inside. She paused for a moment and took it all in. This was it, the opportunity of a lifetime. And as much as she was excited, there was that nagging voice in the back of her head telling her that she wasn't enough. That she didn't belong here. Her stomach fluttered as she adjusted the strap of her backpack and made her way toward the entrance. The campus was bustling with other interns, all walking with purpose, each one seemingly more confident than the last. Emma felt small among them, but she reminded herself that she belonged here, just like they did. She had worked hard to get here. Her experience with Dr. Evans, the study group, and everything else had prepared her for this moment, even if it didn't always feel like it. "Hey, you must be Emma, right?" a voice suddenly called out. Emma turned to find a friendly-looking guy in a NASA t-shirt and khaki shorts approaching her. He had short brown hair and a welcoming smile. His posture was relaxed, and there was something about him that immediately made Emma feel less nervous. "Yeah, that's me," Emma said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm here for the internship." He extended his hand. "I'm Jake. We're going to be working together. I'm the intern coordinator, and I'll be showing you around for the first part of the day." Emma shook his hand, relieved to see a familiar, friendly face. She had been dreading that awkward first encounter, but Jake's demeanor made it much easier. "Nice to meet you, Jake," Emma said with a smile. "I'm a little nervous, to be honest." Jake chuckled. "That's totally normal. Everyone is on their first day. But don't worry, we've got a great team here, and we're all excited to work with you." They spent the next few hours touring the campus. Jake showed her everything from the research labs to the astronaut training simulators. Emma could hardly believe she was walking through these halls, where the most brilliant minds in the world had worked for decades. The enormity of it all slowly started to sink in. After the tour, Jake led her to the intern lounge where other new interns were gathered. Some were chatting in groups, while others sat alone, reading or typing on their laptops. It was a far cry from the classrooms at her high school, where everyone knew everyone, and the dynamic was much more comfortable. Here, there was no history, no shared memories, just a room full of strangers. "All right, Emma, here's where you'll be working for the next few months," Jake said, pointing to a desk in the corner of the room. It was neatly organized, with a laptop, a pile of notebooks, and a NASA-branded mug sitting on top. Emma walked over to her desk and sat down. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she tried to push the nerves aside. She had worked so hard for this moment, and now that she was here, she knew she couldn't back down. She had to prove to herself that she was capable. Just as she was about to open her laptop and start familiarizing herself with the first assignment, Jake appeared beside her, holding a folder. "Here's your first task," he said with a grin. "We're working on a project that's related to astronaut training. Your job is to help gather data on some of the exercises that astronauts undergo during their training. It's a big task, but it's one that's critical for our team." Emma nodded, feeling a rush of excitement. This was what she had been dreaming about. This was her chance to make a real impact, to contribute to something bigger than herself. "I'm ready," she said, more to herself than to Jake. "Great," he said, handing her the folder. "I'll check in on you later to see how it's going." As Jake walked away, Emma's heart began to race. She had already stepped into the unknown. But now, it was time to prove herself. The days that followed were a blur of intense work. Emma was thrust into the thick of things almost immediately, helping gather data and conducting research on various aspects of astronaut training. She worked long hours, sometimes late into the evening, but there was a sense of satisfaction that came with each task she completed. She was doing something important. Something real. At first, the workload felt overwhelming. There were moments when she would look at the stacks of data, the complex charts, and the equations she had to solve, and feel her confidence waver. But she kept reminding herself that she was capable. She had gotten this far for a reason. One evening, as Emma sat at her desk, her eyes bloodshot from hours of staring at a screen, she heard someone approach her. She looked up to see Jake standing by her desk, holding a coffee cup in one hand. "How's it going?" he asked, his tone light. Emma smiled, rubbing her eyes. "I'm getting there. It's a lot, but I'm making progress." Jake set the coffee cup down in front of her. "It's good to see you working hard, Emma. But don't burn yourself out. You're not alone in this. The team is here if you need anything." Emma took a deep breath, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. "I appreciate it. I think I've just been trying to prove that I can handle it. But I don't know. It's harder than I thought." Jake nodded, sitting down next to her. I get it. The pressure can be overwhelming. But remember, no one here expects you to be perfect. They just want you to try, to learn. That's what we're all here for. His words stuck with Emma. No one here expects you to be perfect. It was a small reminder, but it was exactly what she needed. Perfection had never been the goal. The goal was growth. The goal was to learn, to take each challenge in stride, and to keep pushing forward. Thanks, Jake, she said, taking a sip of the coffee he had brought her. It was exactly what she needed to keep going. As the week came to a close, Emma found herself settling into the rhythm of the internship. The nerves that had once plagued her were gradually being replaced with confidence. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. She had a long road ahead, but she was beginning to realize that this was only the beginning. Whatever the future held, Emma was ready to face it head-on. The second week of Emma's internship flew by in a whirlwind. She had settled into a routine, diving into her work with a sense of purpose and determination. The research projects were challenging but rewarding, and she had already started to build relationships with some of the other interns. Yet, despite her progress, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was missing. She still felt like an outsider, unsure of where she truly fit in. One afternoon, as Emma worked through a particularly challenging data set, she overheard a conversation from across the room. A group of interns were gathered around, discussing a project they had been working on for a few weeks now. The project was high-profile, and Emma had overheard whispers about it from time to time. It involved a new space mission, one that would be sending astronauts to Mars in the next few years. Did you hear? Dr. Evans is leading the team for the Mars mission, one of the interns said, excitement evident in his voice. Emma froze, her fingers stilling over the keyboard. She hadn't realized Dr. Evans was working on something this big. Her mentor, the man who had believed in her and given her a chance at NASA, was now leading one of the most ambitious space missions in history. That's incredible, another intern replied. They're going to need all the help they can get. I hear the team is going to be selective. A sinking feeling settled in Emma's stomach. She knew Dr. Evans would be involved in something big, it was just who he was, but the reality of it hit her like a ton of bricks. The Mars mission was the pinnacle of space exploration. It was the kind of project that could change everything for her career. And yet, here she was, struggling to prove herself in a world that felt so much bigger than she was. Later that day, as Emma walked back to her desk, she couldn't help but feel a wave of self-doubt. She had always felt like the underdog, but now it seemed like she was up against a mountain she couldn't possibly climb. Dr. Evans had seen something in her, but was she good enough to really make an impact? Was she smart enough? Was she capable? Emma, a voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Jake standing at her desk, holding a clipboard. His easy smile was a welcome distraction. You've been doing some great work this week, he said, his tone warm and encouraging. But I can tell something's on your mind. What's going on? Emma hesitated for a moment before answering. I overheard something about the Mars mission earlier. Dr. Evans is leading the team, and I don't know. It just feels like I'm not even close to being ready for something like that. Jake raised an eyebrow, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. Well, first off, you're here because you earned your spot. Don't doubt that for a second. But I get where you're coming from. The Mars mission is a huge deal. But you don't have to be ready for everything all at once. This internship? It's about learning. You've already proven you've got the skills to be here. Now, it's about pushing yourself even further. And trust me, you'll get there. Emma swallowed the lump in her throat, grateful for Jake's reassurance, even if she wasn't sure she fully believed him. But something in his words struck a chord. Maybe she didn't need to be ready for everything right now. Maybe she just needed to focus on doing her best in the present and trust that the rest would fall into place. Thanks, Jake, she said, managing a small smile. Anytime, Jake replied with a grin. Now, get back to work. We've got this. The following week, Emma found herself in a situation that tested her more than any of the tasks she had faced so far. Dr. Evans had asked her to assist with a presentation for a team of senior scientists. They were discussing the future of human space exploration, and Emma's role was to help compile data on astronaut training programs, highlighting new advancements in virtual reality simulations. At first, it seemed like a straightforward task. But as the deadline loomed closer, Emma realized just how much pressure was riding on the presentation. The scientists would be making key decisions based on the data she provided. She couldn't afford to mess up. The pressure began to mount, and soon, Emma found herself overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task. She spent countless hours in the lab, sifting through research papers, gathering data, and fine-tuning her presentation slides. It was exhausting work, and Emma began to wonder if she was in over her head. One evening, as she sat alone in the lab, staring at her computer screen, the weight of everything started to feel too much. The presentation, the internship, the looming expectation to live up to Dr. Evans' faith in her, it was all too much. She felt her confidence slipping, replaced by a crippling fear of failure. Her hands trembled as she typed out a text to Sophie. "I don't think I can do this. What if I mess up the presentation? What if they think I'm not good enough?" She stared at the screen, waiting for Sophie's reply, but the words didn't come right away. In the silence of the lab, the self-doubt continued to swirl around her, making it harder and harder to concentrate. Then, a notification popped up on her screen. It was a message from Dr. Evans. "Emma, I just wanted to remind you how much you've grown since you first started here. I know this presentation is important, but I believe in your abilities. You've got this. Don't let the pressure overwhelm you. Take a step back and trust yourself." The message hit Emma like a wave. She had been so focused on the pressure that she had forgotten why she was there in the first place. Dr. Evans believed in her. He trusted her. And if he could see her potential, then maybe she needed to believe in herself, too. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and then opened her eyes to the screen in front of her. She had work to do, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her from doing it. Slowly but surely, she began to refocus, tackling the task one step at a time. By the time the presentation rolled around a few days later, Emma was nervous but prepared. As she stood in front of the room, presenting her findings to the senior scientists, she felt a surge of confidence. She had done the work, and now it was time to share it. When the presentation ended, the room was silent for a moment before Dr. Evans spoke up, his voice filled with pride. "Excellent work, Emma," he said. "You've done a remarkable job." Emma couldn't help but smile, feeling a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't perfect, but it was her best. And that was enough. As the weeks went by, Emma continued to rise to the challenges that came her way. The Mars mission still felt like a distant dream, but Emma was no longer afraid of it. She had proven to herself that she could handle the pressure. And she knew that if she kept pushing forward, there would be nothing stopping her from achieving even greater things. It was late one afternoon when Emma received an unexpected email that left her heart racing. She had just finished a long day in the lab, her mind still buzzing from the data she had been working on, when she saw the subject line, "Invitation to join the Mars mission team." Her fingers froze above her keyboard as she clicked on the email, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. The message was from Dr. Evans himself. "Dear Emma, after reviewing your recent contributions to the astronaut training project, I am impressed with your work and your dedication. I believe you have the skills and mindset needed to contribute to the Mars mission team. Therefore, I would like to personally invite you to join the team as an intern. The team will be conducting high-level research, and your expertise could be invaluable. Please let me know if you're interested in this opportunity. I look forward to working with you more closely on this exciting project. Best regards. Dr. Stephen Evans." For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. The Mars mission. She was being invited to join. Her heart pounded in her chest as she reread the email several times, trying to process the gravity of the situation. She had dreamt of this moment, being a part of something that monumental. But now that it was happening, she wasn't sure she was ready. Her mind raced through all the questions that came flooding in. Why me? What if I don't measure up? What if they realize I don't belong here? Emma sat there in silence, staring at the glowing screen in front of her. It felt surreal, like she was in a dream. But the invitation was real, and she knew she had to make a decision. She grabbed her phone and called Sophie, her best friend, her rock through everything. Sophie had been there for her since the beginning, and she needed her input now more than ever. The phone rang a few times before Sophie answered. "Hey, Emma. What's up? You sound out of breath." I just got an email," Emma said, her voice trembling. "Dr. Evans invited me to join the Mars mission team." Sophie's voice went silent for a beat before the excitement bubbled through. "Wait, what? The Mars mission? That's insane, Emma. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. You have to do it." "I don't know," Emma said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not good enough for something this big?" "Stop. You've been preparing for this your whole life. You're already doing incredible things at NASA. This is just the next step in your journey. You've earned this, Emma. Don't doubt yourself." Sophie's words helped Emma steady her nerves, but the fear still lingered. It wasn't just about proving herself to Dr. Evans anymore, it was about being part of something much larger than herself. The weight of it was overwhelming. I just need some time to think," Emma said, her voice softer now. "Take your time," Sophie said gently. "But whatever you decide, I know you'll make the right choice." After the call ended, Emma leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. She thought about everything that had led her here, the sleepless nights, the long hours, the challenges she had faced. She had worked so hard to get to this point. This was the moment she had been working for. But was she ready? The next day, Emma met with Dr. Evans to discuss the invitation further. The moment she stepped into his office, the weight of the decision felt even heavier. "Good morning, Emma," Dr. Evans greeted her with a warm smile. "Please, have a seat." Emma sat down across from him, her hands feeling clammy. She tried to steady her breath, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. "I read your email," Emma began, her voice slightly shaky. "And I'm honored. I don't know if I'm ready for this kind of responsibility." Dr. Evans leaned forward, his expression sincere. "I understand your hesitation. This is a big step, and it's natural to feel uncertain. But I've seen how you've grown over the past few months. You've shown resilience, intelligence, and a passion for this work. Those are the qualities we need on this team. The mission is groundbreaking, and we're going to need people like you, people who aren't afraid to take on challenges, no matter how daunting they may seem." His words struck a chord within Emma, but the fear of failure still gnawed at her. She looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. "Dr. Evans," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "what if I mess up? What if I'm not enough?" He smiled kindly, the reassurance in his eyes steadying her. "Messing up is part of the process, Emma. The people who succeed in this field are the ones who take risks, who learn from their mistakes, and who continue to move forward despite the setbacks. You've already proven you have what it takes. Trust yourself." Emma took a deep breath. For the first time in days, the weight on her chest lightened just a little. She wasn't alone in this. Dr. Evans believed in her. Sophie believed in her. And maybe, just maybe, she could start believing in herself, too. "I'll do it," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I'm in." Dr. Evans's eyes lit up with a genuine smile. "I knew you would be. Welcome to the team, Emma. We're going to do great things together." As Emma left Dr. Evans's office, a surge of excitement mixed with nervous energy flooded her. She was no longer just an intern. She was part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history. The Mars mission was now within reach, and Emma was determined to give it everything she had. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Emma was thrown into intense training and research alongside the rest of the Mars mission team. She had been given a new role within the team, working closely with some of the top scientists and engineers at NASA. The challenges were greater than anything she had ever faced before, but so were the rewards. Each day, Emma felt herself growing more confident in her abilities. She was no longer the shy, uncertain intern. She was becoming a vital part of the team, a person who could make a difference. But even with all the progress she had made, one thought kept pushing through her mind. What if this is all too much? But every time that doubt crept in, she remembered what Dr. Evans had said, trust yourself. And with that, she kept moving forward, one step at a time. The days blurred together as Emma settled deeper into her new role on the Mars mission team. Every morning, she was greeted by the familiar hum of excitement in the air. The energy at NASA had shifted, it was palpable. People moved with purpose, their heads filled with the vision of the future, the enormous task ahead of them. And Emma? She was no longer an outsider. She had earned her place, but the weight of the work, the magnitude of the mission, was never lost on her. Every aspect of the Mars mission was meticulously planned. Every calculation, every experiment, every simulation was crucial to ensuring humanity's success in reaching the Red Planet. Emma had been assigned to the astronaut training division, working closely with the lead scientists and trainers to develop programs that would help the astronauts survive the years-long journey to Mars. It was an incredible responsibility, and she felt every bit of it. It was a Friday morning when Emma received the invitation for her first official mission briefing. The email was brief but clear, meeting for all Mars mission team members in the central briefing room at 9 a.m. Don't be late. She felt a knot of nervous excitement form in her stomach. This was it, the first real look at the mission's next steps. She was going to be part of a larger conversation now, included in discussions that could shape the future of space exploration. The weight of that realization didn't escape her. Arriving at the central briefing room, Emma took a deep breath before entering. The room was large and modern, with rows of seats facing a large projection screen. The atmosphere inside was serious, but there was an undercurrent of excitement too. The people sitting around her were some of the brightest minds in the field, engineers, scientists, astronauts, and trainers. People who had dedicated their lives to the idea that humans could one day walk on Mars. She felt her heart race. Dr. Evans was already there, standing at the front of the room, flipping through a stack of papers. As soon as he saw her, he smiled and gestured for her to sit. "Glad you could make it, Emma," he said warmly. "Take a seat. We'll be starting in just a minute." Emma nodded, settling into one of the empty chairs in the middle row. Her mind was buzzing with questions. This meeting would be the first time the team would discuss the finer details of the mission, the timeline, the risks, the training requirements, the launch date. She could feel the weight of it all, pressing down on her shoulders. Dr. Evans cleared his throat, his voice commanding attention. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "This is a significant meeting. We're getting closer to finalizing many of the mission's core components, and today, we'll be discussing the next steps in our training programs, mission logistics, and, of course, the astronauts who will carry the future of humanity on their shoulders. Let's dive in." The next few hours were a blur of numbers, data, and plans. Emma listened intently as Dr. Evans and the rest of the team walked through every detail. She was introduced to several key figures who would be leading different sections of the mission. The team would focus on three primary areas in the coming months: astronaut selection, training simulations, and mission logistics. As the meeting progressed, Emma found herself fascinated by the complexity of the mission. She had always known that space exploration required precision, but seeing it laid out in such detail was awe-inspiring. Everything, from the oxygen systems to the food supply to the mental health of the astronauts, was being considered. There was no room for error. Every single detail mattered. At one point during the meeting, Dr. Evans turned to her. "Emma, I'd like you to help coordinate the next phase of the astronaut training program. We need someone who can bridge the gap between the psychological aspects of the mission and the technical training the astronauts will go through. We're looking for someone who can ensure that our astronauts are not only physically ready for the journey but mentally prepared as well." Emma's heart skipped a beat. The responsibility felt enormous, but it also felt like an opportunity she couldn't pass up. She had always been passionate about human psychology and resilience. This was her chance to make a real impact. She nodded, her voice steady as she replied, "I'd be honored, Dr. Evans." As the meeting wrapped up, Emma felt a sense of pride. She was officially part of the most ambitious mission humanity had ever attempted. But as the group began to filter out of the room, her excitement gave way to a familiar feeling, the weight of responsibility. The task ahead was not easy. But as she looked around at the people in the room, the thought struck her, she wasn't in this alone. The team was made up of extraordinary individuals, each contributing their expertise, and together, they would make history. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Emma was thrust into meetings with the astronauts who would be participating in the Mars mission, sitting down with them to discuss their training needs. She was involved in helping create mental health programs to ensure the astronauts could maintain their sanity during the long, isolating journey. She met with a psychiatrist who specialized in long-duration space travel, and together, they worked on a program that would help the astronauts manage isolation, stress, and the extreme pressures they would face. There were exercises to help them maintain strong interpersonal relationships with their teammates and techniques to manage anxiety and fear. Emma's expertise in psychology made her a valuable asset to the team, and her input was appreciated by the senior scientists. Despite her growing confidence, there were moments when Emma still felt like an imposter. The mission was so vast, the stakes so high, that the pressure to succeed sometimes felt unbearable. There were moments when she questioned her abilities, when she wondered if she truly belonged in this world of brilliant minds. But each time those doubts crept in, she remembered Dr. Evans's words, "Trust yourself." And slowly, Emma did. One evening, as she was reviewing astronaut training protocols late into the night, Emma's phone buzzed. She looked down at the screen and saw a message from Sophie. "How's the Mars mission?" Emma smiled as she typed her reply, "It's incredible, but also a bit overwhelming. I'm helping develop mental health programs for the astronauts. It's a lot of responsibility." A few moments passed before Sophie responded, "I knew you were going to do amazing things. I'm so proud of you, Emma. Just remember, this is your journey, too. You're not just a part of the mission. You are the mission." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest as she read Sophie's words. She had been so focused on the pressure of the task ahead that she had forgotten the journey was just as important as the destination. She was not just a small piece of the puzzle, she was a key player, and the work she was doing was making a difference. She put down her phone and looked out the window. The stars sparkled above her, distant and untouchable, just like the mission she had joined. But for the first time, she realized that she was closer to those stars than she had ever been. The days leading up to the mission launch felt like an avalanche of tasks, decisions, and expectations, all moving faster than Emma could keep up with. But despite the overwhelming pace, there was a palpable excitement in the air. It was the kind of excitement that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that made you feel like you were part of something much bigger than yourself. It was the kind of excitement that had been building for decades, centuries, even. Humans were finally going to set foot on another planet, and Emma was going to be a part of that historic achievement. It was now just a few weeks before launch. The astronauts had gone through their final rounds of training, the systems had been checked, double-checked, and triple-checked. Emma had spent countless hours working with the psychological support team, refining the mental resilience programs, preparing the astronauts for the mental and emotional toll the mission would take on them. But despite her confidence in the preparation, there was always a small part of her mind that couldn't help but worry. What if it wasn't enough? What if the stress of isolation became unbearable? What if something went wrong? She pushed those thoughts to the back of her mind. The team had done everything they could, and now all that was left was to trust the process. One afternoon, Emma was sitting in a conference room with Dr. Evans, reviewing the final mission simulation results. The astronauts had just completed their last full-duration simulation of the mission, living in a simulated Mars habitat for weeks on end. The results were promising, but there was still work to be done. "Everything looks good," Dr. Evans said, looking over the data on the screen. "But there are still a few lingering questions about the psychological endurance of the crew." "That's where you come in, Emma." Emma nodded, though her heart skipped a beat. She had become the go-to person for anything related to the mental health and resilience of the crew, and that responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. "I've been refining the mental health protocols based on the data we have from the simulations," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of nervousness. "I think we need to increase focus on group dynamics, more targeted exercises to help them bond and resolve conflicts before they escalate." "Good thinking," Dr. Evans agreed, nodding thoughtfully. "Those interpersonal dynamics could be critical. The astronauts will be isolated for a long time, and it's important they learn how to support one another." Emma felt a rush of pride. Her contributions were no longer just small ideas or suggestions, they were central to the success of the mission. She was helping ensure that the astronauts would be ready for the challenges ahead, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically as well. "Let's schedule a meeting with the astronauts tomorrow," Dr. Evans said, snapping her out of her thoughts. "We'll walk through the final preparations and make sure everything is clear before launch. It's time to finalize everything." "Understood," Emma replied, her voice steady. The next day, Emma stood before the group of astronauts, all of whom were now a familiar part of her daily life. She had worked closely with each one of them, providing support and guidance throughout their training. Some were veterans of previous missions, while others were rookies, fresh faces filled with excitement and nervous energy. But they all shared one thing in common: they were about to embark on a journey to Mars. She stood at the front of the room, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest. It had been a while since she had addressed the entire crew, and she knew that this was the most critical meeting of all. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice strong and clear. "Today is the day we finalize everything. The mission is almost here, and I want to remind all of you just how far we've come. But more importantly, I want to emphasize the importance of the next few weeks, not just in terms of physical preparation, but mental preparation as well. The challenges you'll face on Mars will be unlike anything you've encountered before. But I have faith in each and every one of you. You've been chosen for this mission because you are resilient, capable, and ready for this challenge." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The astronauts were all looking at her now, their faces a mix of determination and uncertainty. "We've designed an in-depth support system," she continued. "From daily check-ins to group sessions, you will have access to the mental and emotional resources you need throughout the journey. Remember that you're not alone. You have each other, and you have a whole team here at NASA backing you up. We're all in this together." As she spoke, Emma could see the astronauts nodding, some of them exchanging glances, their faces softening with relief. It was clear they appreciated her reassurance. "And one more thing," Emma added, her voice quieting for emphasis. "I want you all to remember why we're doing this. The mission to Mars isn't just about science and exploration, it's about humanity's future. You are pioneers. What you accomplish on that spacecraft will lay the foundation for generations to come. You are making history." A silence fell over the room. The weight of Emma's words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, she could see the enormity of the mission reflected in their eyes. "We've trained for this. We've prepared for this," she continued, her voice more confident now. And we're ready. The room erupted into applause. The astronauts stood, clapping, some of them giving Emma nods of respect. She could feel her chest swell with pride. This was more than just a job for her, it was a calling. She was helping make history. As the meeting wrapped up, Emma found herself standing alone at the front of the room, watching the astronauts filter out, each one lost in their thoughts, perhaps reflecting on the magnitude of what lay ahead. Dr. Evans came over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did great, Emma," he said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "This mission wouldn't be the same without you." Emma smiled, though a small pang of doubt still lingered in her heart. The mission was so close now. The countdown had begun, and there was no turning back. But despite the fear, despite the unknowns, she knew one thing for sure: this was the moment she had worked for. She was ready. They were all ready. The next few days were filled with final checks, countdowns, and farewell messages. The astronauts said their goodbyes to their families and friends, leaving Earth behind for the journey of a lifetime. Emma watched them prepare with a mix of awe and admiration. They were brave, and they were ready. The launch day arrived. It was early in the morning, and the entire team gathered at the launch pad, standing in the shadow of the massive spacecraft. The tension in the air was thick, everyone knew that this was it. The culmination of years of work. Years of sacrifice. Years of dreaming. Emma stood beside Dr. Evans, her heart pounding in her chest. The countdown echoed through the air, each second ticking away like a drumbeat of destiny. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The ground shook as the rockets roared to life, propelling the spacecraft into the sky. Emma watched, tears welling up in her eyes, as the astronauts disappeared into the heavens, leaving Earth behind. The mission to Mars had officially begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment. Do you think we are ready for the Mars mission? What do you think will be the biggest challenge for the astronauts? Let's discuss.